When witnessing, do you think it's a better tactic to begin with Jesus, show his divinity, or argue for God's existence? Or be more like Paul in Acts? Approach depends on whom you may be talking to. Since Jesus is the word/truth and source of all knowledge, should we start with him?
Well, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule here. This is the difference between what has been described as a one-step or a two-step approach. The two-step is the classical approach. So you start with the reasons why God existed and then show that Jesus was the incarnation of God in this world and work from that particular point. The other one is an historical approach, a one-step, where you start with Jesus and the resurrection, say, and then you move from there. So both are valid, and I think a lot depends on the individual. Paul says in Colossians 4 that we should conduct ourselves with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity, seasoning our words with salt, speaking with grace, so that we know how to respond to each person, so that we know how we should respond to each person. And I think what this indicates is that we have to be sensitive to the person. Pretty straightforward. Some people are atheists, and they're not going to believe anything about Jesus being a divine individual accomplishing a divine mission if they don't believe in a divine. And so giving reasons why God exists is really critical. And I think it is actually the most important question, because that is the foundation of everything that follows. And if there is no God, there's no sense talking about any of this stuff, because a whole bunch of things collapse under the weight of atheism. And my point here is that there's an entailment relationship between different worldviews. If you believe that there is a God, then the notion of purpose and the notion of objective morality and the notion of sin and the notion of salvation all make sense in that worldview. None of that makes sense in an atheistic worldview. So if we're going to try to speak to these issues, sometimes we have to address the existence of God question before people are willing to engage these other things that are native to a theistic worldview. There are different ways to do that, and we talk about that, but just simply put, sometimes that's the best place to start. That wasn't where the Athenians needed to start. They weren't atheists. They believe in all kinds of gods, too many. And so what Paul did was start there in his talk on Mars Hill with a common belief in gods, or in the existence of a god or gods. And he then leveraged off of this statue that was to an unknown God, and he said, "That which you worship in ignorance, I proclaim to you openly." Let me tell you about that guy. And then he preaches the true God. So he is working with those people in their circumstances, and I think this is really critically important. It's implicit there in the passage that I cited from Colossians 4, verse 5 and 6, but it's also smart. You have to start where people are at. You have to start with the issues that are front and center for them. And that might be an awareness of their sin and their lostness, and therefore a proclamation that Jesus came to solve the problem they're experiencing. I had a session just the other day, maybe a week or so ago, with someone who came out of a Roman Catholic background but had no confidence, or actually he was Roman Catholic, but had no confidence of salvation. That was my starting point. I didn't have to talk to him about the existence of God or Jesus or the Bible or any of that stuff. I talked to him about how he could know that he had eternal life. So that was the touchstone. And everybody's going to be different. There is a value to each of these approaches, but my recommendation is you follow the tactical game plan and start with simply gathering information. The more information you can gather about a person, where they're at, what they believe, what their convictions are, what reasons they have for their convictions, the more that you will be situated better situated to speak to those particular needs and, as I often say, put a stone in their shoe, get them thinking, annoy them in a good way about spiritual things.
That's what I was going to say, Greg. This is why the Columbo tactic is so helpful. If you have a set kind of plan for every single person, you're going to miss what they actually need to hear. And that's why asking them questions about what they believe will give you the starting point that's appropriate for that actual person. Sometimes with atheists, I can't even start with the existence of God. I have to start with objective truth and objective morality and the fact that you can even know anything about God. Sometimes you have to start that far back. But then if I'm talking to somebody who's of another religion, you mentioned this, Greg, too, I find that what I end up talking about is guilt and how you deal with guilt in your religion. And then that is the opening point to talk about Jesus. So the questions are absolutely crucial if you want to have an individual approach to each person and not try and shove everyone into a certain box of the way that you talk about God and how you explain the Christian message. And maybe that's a little bit intimidating to people. And if that's the case, then I think it's fine to have a general plan and to start off with whatever kind of idea you have for how you want to have the conversation. Just be open to moving to wherever it is that they seem to be. So there's nothing wrong with kind of having these training wheels of having an approach in mind as you start out. I don't want to discourage that and have people get too discouraged. But just the better you get at it, the more used to talking to people that you get, you'll find that it's so much better to start with the questions and find out where they are and then go from there.